Good evening. My name is Michael Schober, Dean of the New School for Social Research, also known as the Graduate Faculty of Political and Social Science. I'm delighted to welcome you to the New School, which couldn't be a more fitting venue for this evening's panel. For any of you who are new to us, the New School is an educational and cultural venue like no other. It was founded in 1919 by dissident scholars from Uptown, Columbia, who were unwilling to sign loyalty oaths in the First World War, among other complaints. They wanted to create an educational experience exactly unlike that at the old school, to connect the intellectual and artistic worlds with the general public. This evening's event fits beautifully into that founding mission. It also fits beautifully into another of the university's historic moments when the New School's president, Alvin Johnson, spearheaded an effort in 1933 to rescue German and Austrian scholars who were in danger under National Socialism. The University in Exile, which he founded, which soon became the Graduate Faculty of Political and Social Science, became a haven for rigorous thinkers who connect the social, the political, and the philosophical, and who are committed to thinking across disciplinary boundaries and in ways that connect with the most important concerns of the day. Let me now introduce you to a modern-day inheritor of that tradition, Professor James Miller, whose most recent book, Examined Lives, From Socrates to Nietzsche, is the inspiration for this evening's panel. James Miller is Chair of Liberal Studies and Professor of Politics at the New School for Social Research. He is the author of 5 other notable and celebrated books on a wide variety of topics: Flowers in the Dustbin, The Rise of Rock and Roll in 1947 to 1977, The Passion of Michel Foucault, Democracy is in the Streets, From Port Huron to the Seas of Chicago, an account of the American student movement of the 1960s, Rousseau, Dreamer of Democracy, a study of the origins of modern democracy, and History and Human Existence, From Marx to Merleau-Ponty, an analysis of Marx and the French existentialist. Beyond this quite remarkable set of works, Jim has an extraordinary record of academic and popular writing, including being the original editor of the Rolling Stone Illustrated History of Rock and Roll, book reviewer and pop music critic at Newsweek between 1981 and 1990, and author of a well-known lingua franca essay called Is Bad Writing Necessary? George Orwell, Theodore Adorno, and the Politics of Language. For 8 years, he served as editor of Daedalus, the journal of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. I am honored to count Jim as a colleague as well as a friend. Jim Miller.
Thank you, Michael. It's a great honor to have you as my dean and also as a dear friend. I also want to thank the audience, all of you, for coming out on a terrible night in which some forecasts were calling for golf ball size ice pellets. So that you braved the elements for a panel on philosophy is awesome. Thank you. I'd like to start by explaining why I invited everyone else that's on this panel. We all try, I think, to popularize philosophy. That is, to make philosophy interesting and relevant to people who are not themselves philosophers. But we all do this in somewhat different ways, and I can describe how, I think, best by introducing the panelists in alphabetical order. My colleague Simon Critchley is chair of the philosophy department here at the New School for Social Research. He's written 13 books over the past 2 decades, from The Ethics of Deconstruction in 1993 to The Faith of the Faithless, which is coming out this year. Though he has a special interest in modern continental philosophy, he's written on a wide variety of topics, most recently on ethics and political theory, the relation between philosophy and poetry, and the nature of humor. At present, he's working on Rousseau, Heidegger, Ibsen, Beckett, Pessoa, and Levinas. Simon is especially relevant for this panel because of his efforts to write about philosophy with a light touch, above all in his delightfully morbid Book of Dead Philosophers from 2008. Critchley has also demonstrated that there is a continuing interest in philosophy today by moderating an online philosophy blog, The Stone, for the New York Times, that has turned out to be astonishingly popular, I think far beyond probably what you expected when you began it. Anthony Gottlieb is a visiting scholar currently at New York University, and he's taught as well at the New School a class we titled On Nothing. in fact. He was on the staff of The Economist for over 20 years and that magazine's executive editor from 1997 to 2006. Although Anthony once told an interviewer that he entered journalism, quote, by accident as a distraction from academic philosophy, which he studied at Cambridge University, philosophy has nonetheless remained a non-academic passion for him. In 2001, Gottlieb published The Dream of Reason, the first in a projected 3-volume history of philosophy aimed at non-specialists. In recent years, Gottlieb's essays on philosophers and philosophical topics have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times Book Review, The Wall Street Journal, and online at moreintelligentlife.com. Our youngest panelist, Astra Taylor, is a writer, a documentary filmmaker, and a prodigiously gifted polymath. In 2005, she helped form the production company Hidden Driver in order to produce feature-length and short-form documentaries with a focus on intellectual, cultural, and political affairs. The company has since produced short videos for The Nation magazine, Art Review magazine, the Museum of Modern Art, the Venice Biennale, among other clients. But Astra is best known for 2 feature-length documentaries, Zizek, about the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Zizek from 2005, and Examined Life from 2008. This last film offered peripatetic profiles of a number of well-known contemporary philosophers, from Judith Butler and Martha Nussbaum to Peter Singer and Cornel West. I've known Astra for years. She's a graduate of the New School, and she has been preoccupied with philosophy and social change and how philosophers can engage constructively with the larger world for as long as I've known her. And then there is Cornel West, for 20 years one of America's most prominent public intellectuals. His writing, speaking, and teaching weave together the traditions of the Black Baptist Church, progressive politics, and rhythm and blues and jazz. He's best known for his classic book, Race Matters, published in 1993, its sequel, Democracy Matters, and a memoir he published last year, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. He's also published important monographs on Marxism and ethics and on the pragmatic strain in American philosophy. More than anybody else on our panel, West is a multimedia phenomenon, someone who's brought his philosophy to life in America's living rooms and multiplexes. He appears frequently on television on The Bill Maher Show, The Colbert Report, CNN, and C-SPAN. He can be heard weekly on Tavis Smiley's radio program and on the Smiley and West radio show that debuted last October. He made his film debut in The Matrix and has appeared in over 25 other films and documentaries since then. A devoted recording artist, he's released spoken word and hip-hop albums and collaborated with musicians as different as Prince, Terrence Blanchard, and the late Gerald Levert. Last but not least, I'm really envious of this accomplishment. A characteristic quote from West was featured on the Starbucks Collector's Coffee Cup series, The Way I See It, specifically on Collector's Cup number 284. Quote, "You can't lead the people if you don't love the people. You can't save the people if you don't serve the people." So before going on, I want to thank all of you, Simon, Anthony, Astra, and of course, Brother West, for being here tonight. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so our question tonight, does philosophy still matter? Anthony Gottlieb suggested I take a snap poll of the audience. We live in a democratic society, seemed like a good idea. So, as of this moment, how many of you in the audience think the answer to the question, does philosophy still matter? The answer is no. Raise your hands. Oh, yes, very good. Very good. I think we had 6 people. Did you get their names? How many think instead the answer to the question, does philosophy still matter, is yes? Raise your hands. We can go home. Yeah, that's it. We can go home now. You know, it's bad out there, so. Seriously, it seems to me that given the overwhelming response that this event received in terms of RSVPs, and given the coverage the New York Times Book Review gave last Sunday, essentially turned over a whole issue to themes of philosophy, with essays on philosophy and literature by James Ryerson and a couple of book reviews. It's obvious that there is something in the air, the stone is another example, that suggests philosophy does still matter. And that then raises the question, what kind of philosophy matters? How should we define philosophy? And how does any specific form of philosophy come to matter? And how does it matter to someone? Another question I think that's raised by this panel in particular is what is gained and what, if anything, is lost when someone tries to make philosophy relevant to non-specialists, to people who aren't philosophers. These aren't the only questions worth exploring tonight. Here are a few others I'd like to suggest at the outset. One, if, like Plato, we define philosophy as a quest for wisdom that may prove unending and perhaps may yield no positive certain results, then what is the search for wisdom really good for? Two, what is the relation of reason to faith, of philosophy to religion, and how does the search for wisdom relate to the most exacting forms of rigorous inquiry in what we today would call science? Three, is philosophy best pursued in private or in public? What are its implications, if any, for statecraft or for the conduct of a citizen in a democratic society? Four, should philosophy aim to edify and inspire, or primarily to disturb and disquiet, or somehow both simultaneously? It's hard to imagine how that would work. Five, and this is my most narrow question because it's something that arises out of my new book, and some reviewers have commented on it, so I just want to put it out there. Is the Socratic ambition, as it appears in Plato, which I take to be one of the core foundations of the philosophical tradition in the West, is the Socratic ambition, that is to say, embodying a life of perfect integrity by exemplifying a rational unity of thought and action, really worthwhile? By rational unity, I mean that a person is able to articulate a set of provisional beliefs about the best way to live that is consistent and reasonable, and also that one's conduct is invariably consistent with these beliefs. Is such perfect integrity even feasible in practice? Is struggling to attain such integrity worthwhile, even if perfect integrity is impossible? I'll end these introductory comments by giving my own short answers to three of my own questions just to get the conversation started. One, philosophy, I would define as a quest, not a body of authoritative knowledge. The search for wisdom implies that one doesn't yet have wisdom. Two, despite the example of Socrates, I do not believe that a rational unity of thought and action is feasible in practice for most human beings and perhaps for any human being. Bertrand Russell once put it this way, quote, "Most people would rather die than think, and most people do." Three, I nevertheless think that the Socratic ambition is worthwhile, even if examining one's life seriously seems now to entail an unending quest with no firm goal and no certain reward. To be honest, I personally can't think of a more interesting way to live, speaking for myself. Our format tonight's very informal. I've asked the panelists to act as if we were all at a classical symposium, although we left our bottle of wine backstage. We're going to try to have an actual conversation spontaneously, prodded as needed by our moderator before he invites comments and questions from the floor. So let me finally introduce our moderator tonight. Louis H. Lapham is an American writer who has become something of an American institution. He was the editor of Harper's Monthly magazine most of the time from 1976 until 2006, with a hiatus of a couple of years. His essays have appeared over the years in Vanity Fair, Fortune, the Yale Literary Magazine, National Review, the Weekly Standard, the Wall Street Journal. You're very promiscuous in where you publish. His 14 books range from Money and Class in America in 1988 to Pretensions to Empire, Notes on the Criminal Folly of the Bush Administration in 2006. he wrote The American Ruling Class, a documentary film aired on the Sundance Channel in 2007. A former host of the PBS series Bookmark, he currently hosts The World in Time for Bloomberg Radio. Upon leaving Harper's, he promptly launched an audacious new publishing venture, Lapham's Quarterly, that is meant to reprint the best that has been thought and written on everything from sex to money, so that it may bring some light to our benighted contemporary culture. Mr. Lapham.
I am happy to be here in such august company, I must say that, right? I can't think of a better way to start except to start asking the panel the first of your questions. What is the search for wisdom really good for? And I guess we could, I'll start with you, Anthony, and move around the table and hope for the best.
What is it good for? I suppose there are two different sorts of answers to that. One is...
Speak into the microphone, young man.
Okay, can you hear me now? There are answers to that which have to do with the benefits that the search for wisdom has on other people apart from the searcher, the extent to which you can help society. And there are the effects on the individual. The effects on society, I suppose I would think that philosophy is of great benefit to almost every other discipline, or is of potentially great benefit to almost every other discipline. And although I don't think anyone has ever attempted to try to count the number of philosophical problems, my firm impression is that it's on the increase, and that we have a particularly large number of philosophical problems.
So you would be a teacher of philosopher kings?
A teacher of philosopher kings?
Yeah.
To some extent, but I would say also philosopher scientists, philosopher politicians, philosopher writers.
So it's
Not
a
just
good
kings.
that can be handed to people rather than a personal narrative.
Yes, by helping to teach them how to think consistently about the most difficult questions.
So you're a public servant.
Well, that was one half of my set. I think it's also of great benefit to the person who does it themselves.
Okay. Astra? Repeating the question,
Yes, repeat the question.
what is the search for wisdom really good for?
What is the search for wisdom really good for? That seems to me like the wrong question, because it doesn't seem to be good for much. When you mentioned the idea of philosopher kings, I just thought that sounds like a terrible idea. One thing I would never do is ask a philosopher for life advice.
You've interviewed a lot of them, haven't you?
But I do think that it offers a sort of unappreciated pleasure, and I suppose that's one thing in my work that I'm trying to show, is that I'm more in line with the idea not of philosophy as consolation, but philosophy as something that's unsettling, that throws up, that challenges the tyranny of common sense, I guess, as has been said by, I think, Bertrand Russell. So is that really, maybe that's an end in itself, but I'm not sure that there's a utility or measurable utility that comes from it. So is philosophy a good?
Does it teach you how to live or why you have to die?
Does philosophy teach
I
you
mean,
how to live?
on a personal level, where's the money in it?
Where's the money? That's precisely it. There's no money in it. There's no utility. A lot of frustration with philosophy is, oh, why philosophy? It goes over the same questions, these intractable questions over and over and over and over. Maybe one thing it can do is help you accept the fact that there are certain things that have no answer, and yet you have to wrestle with them nonetheless. Is that good? That good doesn't quite seem like the right word to me.
Cornell?
Well, first I wanted to just congratulate Brother James Miller on his recent book. That's how philosophy begins. I think philosophy ought to begin with a note of gratitude and a note of awe and a note of wonder and a note of radical finitude and all the faults and foibles that we have, but we move forward nevertheless. That for me, on a very personal note, what Nietzsche said of Montaigne, the very fact that this man wrote truly augments the joy of living on this earth. I like that. That's what philosophy's done for me. That I'm only here a short time. I'm a vanishing creature just like everybody else in this room. And one day they'll be long gone. And the fact that we try to find some joy in the short time that we're here. So when I read Plato and when I read Hume, when I read Whitehead, when I read Rorty, when I read Dewey, I actually have unadulterated joy, even though I disagree with each and every one of them. At the same time, though, I must be honest, because here I take very seriously line 607b5 of Book 10 of Plato's Republic, talks about the traditional quarrel between philosophy and poetry. For me, philosophy must not just go to school with poets, but come to terms with the very conditions of its possibility in the West, which is poetry and the polis, which is myth and politics. And that's where Socrates begins as a construct in Plato's text. The first time we get a philosophical discourse, Plato was using Socrates to displace Homer, to displace the poets in their wrestling with paideia, wrestling with conceptions of education. And in all honesty, I don't know a philosopher. Most of my calling as a thinker, as a dramatic lover of wisdom, has been trying to find a philosophic analog to Chekhov, to Shakespeare, to Beethoven, and Coltrane. I've yet to find one. That I gain much more joy in the poets and the musicians than I do the philosophers, owing to the fact that they have been so tied to a certain kind of confidence and optimism that I do not share at all.
So you
now, Hume and Wittgenstein are candidates, but they're still lower tiers on the dean's list. But Shakespeare, Beethoven, Beckett, Chekhov, Kafka, that's me.
So, wait a minute, Cornell. So, from your point of view, philosophy is an art, not a science.
Well, no, I think philosophy must go to school with science. I think we need a philosophy of quantum mechanics. We need a philosophy to make sense of quarks and dark energy and so forth. In the modern world, we don't want to be monopolistic and think that philosophy only goes to school with science. That I come out of a humanistic tradition that says that in the end, the poets, as well as the new secular priesthood, which are the physicists, right? Since Newton, since Sir Isaac, on to Einstein, those who tell us what the nature of reality is, we go to the physicists to tell us. Right? They have a crucial role, but they must not in any way become so monopolistic that they downplay the poets, the musicians, the choreographers, the dancers, those of us trying to make sense of the art of living.
Can you bear to read a philosopher who can't write well?
Oh, sure. I mentioned John Dewey. I love Dewey, but he's no William James. We know that. He does not write well at all.
All right. Simon, what is the quest for wisdom good for?
Nothing. It's good for... Yeah, seriously, good for nothing. It's of no utility. It's of no practical utility. Philosophers are not policymakers. Philosophers are not... it's not reducible to the business of politics. It doesn't make you healthier, wealthier, or anything like that. In that sense, it's useless, and Socrates was killed for engaging in that. But let's remind ourselves what we're talking about. We're talking about...
Wait a minute, Simon.
Okay.
Why then do all but 6 people in this auditorium raise their hands and say philosophy matters?
What philosophy does is, let's just go back to what Cornell was talking about. We have 3 people, Socrates and 2 of Plato's brothers in the Republic, who wander out of the Agora on the road to Piraeus, and they begin to ask a series of questions about the nature of justice. So what philosophy does, philosophy is three people in that context, 3 people leaving the city and dreaming of another city in speech, dreaming of another way of ordering society. So and that's why Socrates was killed, because he showed impiety towards the gods of the city, and he corrupted the youth. The task of philosophy is impiety and corruption, right? That's what we're doing, and
it's rock music.
Well, there can be, or it's what rock music used to be, maybe in a previous generation, as Jim so elegantly shows in Flowers in the Dustbin.
Then presumably it is good for something.
Well, yeah, but philosophy is something that cuts a diagonal through common sense. It cuts a diagonal through doxa, through opinion. So whatever we take to be the opinion about justice or truth or love or happiness. Philosophy will contest that and raise a question for which there's no obvious answer. And what we are given, as Socrates puts it in that passage from Republic that Cornell was alluding to, is provide what is called in Greek a methodos. But that means a way. It's a way, not a rigorous, as it were, not a scientific method, but a path of thinking that one can walk along. And if you follow that path, if you're seduced by the temptations that the different philosophers can offer you, and part of what a philosophical education is about is learning to be seduced by temptations that are internally coherent but inconsistent between each other. Right? One can believe that Spinoza is true and that Descartes is true, and you know they can't both be true. So it requires a sort of gymnastics of thought at that level. That's very important. And it allows you to contest what is taken for granted, what passes for common sense. For me, that's the...
So,
and that's
wait a minute, I'm going to get to Miller, who is really the Plato in this symposium, but
So bad, Louis.
But in other words, could you say that it was a getting to know your own mind and taking joy in your own mind? Is that a fair?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
I think it's
none of that. Right?
Philosophy is not an activity that's done alone. Philosophy from the beginning is a shared enterprise that takes place in and as dialogue. It's two people or more than two people. So the identification of philosophy with introspection or internal or contemplation, I think, is questionable. Philosophy is, and the philosophical schools in Athens began as groups, collectives, on the edge of the city that were designed to teach. Originally, the doctrines of Socrates, and so for me, it's a group activity. Philosophy. It's something you do collectively.
I don't want to try to draw together here, because it seems to me as we've gone around the table, there are a lot of implicit or explicit contradictions in how the answers have come. And I sort of hear you, Simon, saying that you welcome a pluralism of incommensurable options of understanding because it produces anarchy and shakes any kind of certitude. The backdrop, it seems to me, to my book is the state of philosophy as an academic discipline, which I want to refer to briefly, because I think that Anthony, when he began, the kind of answer he gave about how it helps clarify thinking in applied disciplines would be the standard understanding of philosophy today, not anything that Brother West has said or Simon has said. There was a recent historian of logical positivism, Scott Soames, who writes of analytic philosophy, quote, "It has become an aggregate of related but semi-independent investigations, very much like other academic disciplines. Gone are the days of large central figures whose work is accessible and relevant to, as well as read by, all philosophers. Philosophy has become a highly organized discipline done by specialists, primarily for other specialists." And there's this model that's out there of philosophy as divided into these very rigorous subfields of logic, semantics, ethics, and there are many applied forms of philosophy. But I think that for many of us who hark back to Plato, what drew certainly me to philosophy is the Platonic dialogues, which are themselves a form of poetry, in which the philosopher is portrayed in a form of fiction in these dialogues, striving for some kind of integration and cohesion, and eventually some kind of transcendence. A sense that this isn't all we have. We struggle to understand this world, but there are mysteries that are sacred and unfathomable that we want to open ourselves to. This is the part of philosophy that is very close to religion and even mysticism. And it's as if in the Anglo-American Academy, it's been banished. It's like to somebody like Scott Soames at Princeton, he's a very good historian of analytic philosophy, but it's like some of what we're talking about, I'm sure he would just think is complete rubbish. So
Well,
it raises the question, what is philosophy?
Well, I mean, then you got to take that up with Anthony, because you're saying it's personal enlightenment, and Anthony is saying it's a public good.
Among other things.
I mean, so
one thing
you
we
know,
all
I
agree
mean,
on is philosophy is
you're going to
many things.
defend, I hope, the notion of the academic discipline
Sorry.
and a body of certified thought, right?
Sorry.
He's expecting you to defend academic philosophy, which you fled from. So how that's supposed to work, I'm not quite sure. But
You want me to defend?
No. I mean,
I'm happy to do so.
I mean, Jim has just said that it's a personal revelation, right?
well, the kind of philosophy that attracted me, which is not the only kind of philosophy, is that. And I just want to recognize that we have many different implicit definitions of philosophy that have already been referred to in the course of just going around the table. And so I'd like us, perhaps it'd be useful to clarify what some of the differences are. And I think, Anthony, you do work with a different background set of assumptions about what counts as philosophy. We were in a classroom once in the course on nothing, and I told him he had to teach Heidegger, and so he taught Heidegger, and he walked in and he said, "This is completely beyond comprehension." And I said, "But wait a minute, in the first paragraph, Heidegger says everybody will say this is completely beyond comprehension. So what do you say about that?" But so it's that, yeah, if you could.
Yeah. As I don't think Heidegger gets off that hook there that easily. I think that there are many kinds of philosophy, and I'm interested in quite a few of them. I think it's definitely a mistake to try and settle on one narrow definition of philosophy. One of the reasons I like it is that it has several branches, several ways of doing it. The two extremes, I suppose, are academic philosophy as it's practiced now, especially in the English-speaking world, and the search for spiritual enlightenment. Those are sort of two opposite extremes, and then there's all sorts of stuff in the middle.
But let me just put in a word in defense of academic philosophy, even given its severe limitations. And what I mean by that is this, that, you know, I was blessed to actually study with 6 of the philosophic geniuses in academic philosophy: Nelson Goodman, W.V. Quine, John Rawls, Robert Nozick, Stanley Cavell, and Hilary Putnam. Never before in the history of academic philosophy have you had a collection of philosophic geniuses. Harvard had Santayana and James and Royce, but they were greater public figures, but they didn't have the same philosophical acumen that those 6 that I mentioned. Now, all of them, for the most part, reached the conclusion that the basic assumptions of most of logical positivism, most analytical philosophy, radically call into question. And they had already made the move before Rorty popularized it in its own way. Now, what does that mean? That means that we live in an Alexandrian age. Highly professionalized, specialized, commodified, bureaucratized, rationalized. And therefore, any sense of speculation, any sense of poetic vision, any sense of prophetic witness is pushed to the margin. Well, I quite unabashedly, even given the joys I received studying with those brothers, and they were all brothers because it's still very much a patriarchal affair. We've got Martha Nussbaum and Judith Butler and some other giants who are women, but it's still very deeply patriarchal. But what happens is what they push to the margin: speculation, poetry, prophetic witness, utopian interruption, wrestling with suffering, structures of domination, imperialism, colonialism, all the things that are probably most important about modern life that need to be wrestled with are pushed to the periphery. And what is zeroed in on are these fascinating, professional, logical, philosophic questions that could take 3 lifetimes to wrestle with. And it's a lot of fun. It is. I mean, there's a word to be said for intellectual hedonism here. It's a lot of fun. And so I think what we have to do is, in a Jacobian fashion, right? I mean, you hang loose, you know? You say, hey, this is fascinating, but the framework's too narrow for me in terms of my own calling. This is
Cornell,
challenging.
was Christ a philosopher?
Jesus?
Jesus.
No. He wasn't a philosopher at all.
but
He
he-
said he's God. God don't need to be a philosopher. Shit. That's the last thing he want to be, is a philosopher. Philosophy is for we mortals. Vanishing creatures, not the ones who bounce back on the third day.
All right. Is a philosopher supposed to be an inspirational figure?
No, but can I add something here? I think that this whole question of who's in and who's out really gets to the anxiety that's even in the question, does philosophy still matter? Right? There's an uncertainty there, like, does what we do matter? And why is that? Why is philosophy plagued by self-doubt? And I think that part of that is because professional philosophers have done so much to build this wall and define inside and outside. Sure. Now, there are many academic disciplines. You know, if you study to be an economist, you can have a professor in that field. There are professionals. There are journalism schools. There are journalists. There are women's studies departments, and there are women. There are art schools, and there are artists, right? English departments and authors. Philosophers do not let there be any philosophers outside of the university. And what this has done is sort of secure their professional value, but it's also stifled the practice of philosophy. It's deprived it of a certain lifeblood. I think that the love of knowledge has been sort of smothered by the love of these philosophers who are very afraid of sort of letting go, because, you know, and even within the sort of official areas, you know, where you ask the leading philosophers, well, what is philosophy? They'll still invoke these sort of grandiose enterprise. You know, it's a love of reason. It's to you know, answer the big questions in life. It's thinking logically. It's critical thinking. These are things that we go, well, anyone should be able to do this. But then they go, no, you're not a real philosopher. You're just, you know, dabbling with pseudo problems over there. So I think this has to be acknowledged, right? That there's been a lot of energy devoted to establishing in and out, and this has reified philosophy as a professional pursuit, but also deprived it of energy and urgency, and deprived people of this approach. When we say philosophy too, I just want to say there's a latent aspect and a blatant aspect, right? There is the philosophy that is all around us in our environment. There are unknown knowns, as Zizek would say, our unconscious presuppositions, the ideas we don't know we have, right? And there's also the ideas built into the environment, built into our social structures. That's the latent philosophy. And we need active philosophy to be able to address that, to be able to talk about these things. So I think when we say to people, but you're not a philosopher, that means you can't do that. You can't do that legitimately. And that's why philosophy is then anxious. Well, does it still matter? Well, maybe it would if you would let go a little bit.
It's about holding on as tight as possible. I mean, there was a story that was told to me about someone that got a professorship in Australia on the basis of a series of publications, which in prominent journals. After this person and these things were being published in order to get a professorship, once that person had got the professorship, he began to withdraw the papers from the various periodicals. Wow. He was asked, "Why did you do this?" He says, because you must make yourself as small a target as possible. Right? Now, that's one approach to philosophy.
A target,
making yourself as small.
Yeah, but who's shooting at him? Well,
like, who cares to shoot?
Yeah. Well, no, but but I'm against this idea. This is an idea of what I call technically philosophy of constipation, right? So where you, as it were, you hang on to a little bolus of something for years and years and years, and eventually you squeeze it out, right? And in a prominent journal, and that's one approach to philosophy, which is about the avoidance of falsehood at all costs. So the worst thing to be exposed to as a philosopher is falsehood. People will laugh at you. The other approach is that philosophy should be a pursuit of truth, and that takes us from constipation to diarrhea, which would be another way of, because someone like Hegel will say the true is the whole, right? So the philosophy is its time comprehended in thought. So nothing should be alien to philosophy, which means you've got to throw the stuff everywhere at the wall, and some of it sticks and some of it drips down. So you're going to make an impact.
Wait a minute, Simon.
Now, continuing this metaphor.
What is the difference between truth and wisdom?
Depends on the conception of truth. I mean, you find somebody like Adorno, the
emphatic
emphatic conception of truth has to do with how to live, and wisdom is fundamentally about how to live, which is to say how to learn how to die while you live. in order to be able to live a life of integrity. For example, the guy who withdraws his pieces, I'm in deep solidarity with him if he does it in the name of intellectual conscience and intellectual integrity. That's what we love about Nietzsche. Nietzsche may have had trouble learning how to love, which is a problem for many philosophers. Not just love wisdom, but love people. But if it's sheer intellectual integrity and intellectual conscience, I'm with that. If it's a matter of just professional game playing, I don't respect that. It depends on what his motives are, what he understands himself to be doing in that regard. But wisdom fundamentally is about how do we make our way from womb to tomb, unless you're out for cremation. And that's a serious question for everybody. Truth, there's logical conceptions of truth, there's coherence, correspondence theories, coherence theories, but emphatic, and I'm with Adorno in this regard. And Adorno, of course, is inseparable from Jerusalem, Judaism. Condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. That's Adorno, what, page 17, I think it is, Negative Dialectics? He gets that right out of the moral revolution of a people that say to be human is to wrestle with suffering, and your integrity is defined to the degree to which the quality of your service to orphan, widow, fatherless, motherless, poor, working class, and so on. That was a major move in the history of the species. Now, you can dress that up in philosophically more rigorous language, but that's Adorno's conception of truth. It relates to that tradition. There's a lot of other traditions in talking about truth that are quite different.
What I want to do, though, is go back to the diarrhea option, and because another conception of truth is in the New Testament. I am the truth and the way. So I think that
that's the same tradition as Judaism.
Yeah,
Jesus
but
was a Jew.
in other words, though, I want to just pause for a moment about the question of the notion of philosophy as something akin to a spiritual quest.
Yes.
Because I think part of the recurrent and even the recent interest in philosophy, which makes many analytic philosophers profoundly uncomfortable, is that it's in a continuum with this conception. I think this is a very American feature of philosophy, going back to Emerson. And, you know, it seems to me it's something that I'm not quite sure what we should say about it. I don't know about you, Simon, or you, Cornell, but, you know, when I look at some of the comments that I'm getting on blogs that are about my book, I'm struck by how many of these people are, they're religious people, they're on a spiritual quest, they want meaning in life, that's what they think. Philosophy is, you know, it reminds me of the world of Augustine, in which philosophy was on a continuum with Manichaeism and Christianity, and it was one form of life that was available in which reason played an important role, but it didn't exclude revelation. It did not exclude mystery. And, you know, simply to call it diarrhea, it seems to me not quite to do justice to that tradition.
Indeed. It's,
no shit.
No shit at all. No, philosophy is. I mean, on my this is a view. There are different views. On my view, philosophy begins in religious disappointment. Philosophy begins when a belief in God or a God equivalent has broken down, and the questioning, the awful, anxious, disquieting questioning about questions of spirituality and the rest, the meaning of life, that passes from religion to philosophy. That's the way I want to understand whatever we think about as the modern philosophical project. What I noticed in your book, Jim, which is a question to you, and an interesting question, you begin and end the book with a reference to your Protestant upbringing. And because in many ways what's behind Examined Lives is the idea that there could be an integrity of life and thought.
Right.
An idea of authenticity, right? And you confess that, I mean, what was motivating that was both, you know, your activism in the 60s, but also this maybe religious background. I wonder about that. I wonder whether that ideal should be, you know, if you seek, you will you find? Well, you end the book by invoking your religious background again, and then in a much more skeptical mode, saying, well, perhaps this is what you quote Montaigne, the fool of a farce. I forget what the quotation is.
The fool of the farce.
The fool of the farce.
You remember that last,
Right.
So I
that
wonder,
next to last
because
page?
it's the question that I mean, the question you raise in the book is that's the question. Is there, if philosophy is the examined life, and there could be in the person of Socrates and those that succeed him
Yeah.
a unity of life and thought. Well, is that an enterprise that's
Well, I
worth pursuing?
suppose the way I would put it, Simon, is that
Or is that a religious question?
the way you phrased it, that philosophy begins with religious disappointment, is to sever those two categories, as if, whereas I think they're both often simultaneously in play, and in ways that are constructive and also very, very disquieting. And actually, in the introduction to my book, I pose a bunch of questions, some of which I just posed tonight, and then I end by saying, if we seek, shall we find, which of course is a biblical reference. I think by the end of the book, which has disturbed a lot of the early reviewers of it, my answer is probably not.
Yeah.
So that's a form of
Well,
discipline.
Jim, on that point, I mean, your book is 12, the lives of 12 philosophers. Of the 12, how many found?
Well, one of the other peculiarities of the philosophical tradition, the fact it's a scandal that philosophy has never quite come to terms with, is how much of the first canonic philosophers are creatures of legend and myth. So Socrates, according to the myth, found. Did he really? I don't know. It seems to me there are people in my book who achieved a certain equanimity. They felt that they could feel at one with who they were. So that Montaigne strikes me as a person like that. And is that because he had a better philosophy or a better temperament, and he was lucky with his temperament? I incline to he was lucky with his temperament, because he was someone who I think had, he was very even-keeled, I think. That was his natural...
Emerson would also...
Yeah.
But if both of those figures had the illnesses of Giacomo Leopardi,
Yeah.
they wouldn't be satisfied. They don't have, a lot of it has to do with luck and chance. They didn't have migraines every day. They didn't have wrestling with TB 26 the way Chekhov was. So a lot of it just has to do with circumstance for which they have no control. But I mean, but I want to say a quick word though about Brother Simon, though, because we've had a wonderful debate about this just right here in this institution just a year and a half ago, right after your show when you had me in the car, because I was on my way to New School and I was in the car with Sister Astra in a movie. But I love his boldness about this notion of disappointment, because I would want to argue that that's a modern bias rooted in a romantic view of the world in which you're so hungry for wholeness and harmony, and if you don't get it, you're locked into alienation and disappointment and disenchantment.
That's me.
I mean, if you know what I mean? So there's nothing wrong with being romantic. It's just that, you know, I'm not one to move in that. I'm a blues man, so I have a different axial move in terms of not looking up. Disappointment is a constant companion all the time. It's not something to be preoccupied with. It's something to wrestle with, the way Jacob wrestles with the angel of death in the 32nd chapter of Genesis. It's always already there. Sorrow is a constant companion for a blues man like me. See what I mean? It's always already. That's Chekhov, that's Beckett. It's not to be, some preoccupation we have in order to then move toward philosophy, right? I mean, to be human is to be shattered, and in Goethe's language, shuddering all the time. It's not a question of hoping for some wholeness, disappointment sets in, then let's philosophize. No. We come out of the womb, oh shit, We in space and time. It's what Beckett called the mess, right?
Yeah.
He wants to replace Heidegger's talk about being with the mess, and you and I were talking about Bootsy Collins. We replace it with the funk.
Yeah.
That's what it is. How you gonna negotiate through the funk?
I want to defend Simon a bit, though, on this disappointment thing.
Okay.
I mean, and take it out of religiosity and move it. You can have secular disappointment, too. I think what moved me towards philosophy was this revelation that I couldn't logically argue everyone into being vegetarians. I just thought, I figured this out. I will present my arguments as clearly as possible. Everyone will agree with me. So for me, it's less about a search for some answer than this obsession with the fact that there are different ways of viewing the world. There are different schemas that people embrace, different attitudes people have. And there's nothing more pleasurable than reading a philosopher I totally disagree with and finding this amazing new perception. I also want to take us back to this idea of authenticity, because that's a powerful idea. And for me as a documentary filmmaker, there are a few ways to clue into authenticity in a character, for example, right? To show them looking like they've forgotten there's a camera. So we think of authenticity as being like someone brushing their teeth or like drooling, you know, or walking around in their underwear. And I wanted to pose this challenge to my community, which is, what if authenticity is actually what you think and the world you want to live in, and not how you engage with the world as it is? And so for me, it's not so much about intellectual coherence, you know, like me proving, oh, these philosophers, don't you see, Deleuze lives on the 1000th plateau every minute of every day. It's amazing, you know? What would that's what I wanted as a teenager, you know, when I was actually, I'm happy Jim didn't call me out, but I was like, you know, a teenager. I wanted this. I wanted my philosophers to live their ideas.
That's why we admitted you to the school. You know, the 16-year-old in Georgia says she wants to be on the 1000th plateau.
I was like, put me on there.
I mean, this was unbelievable to me.
Yeah. So now, but no, I think this idea of what you think as an authentic mode, I think that's something that is maybe taken for granted in philosophical discourse, but is an interesting challenge to documentary film, to this world of reality TV.
I want to say something. This is not exactly authenticity, I think, in the way Simon was talking about it, but I think one of the things, it's sort of a small, quiet moment in the Platonic dialogues. But one of the things, and it appears in the Republic, but in more than one dialogue, that the character Socrates often basically entreats people is to say what they actually believe, to be sincere. And the sense that philosophy as a collective venture, or in any form that Plato would have understood, depends on this sense that you say what you truly think and try to clarify it rather than pretend they're smarter. I mean, you know, going to graduate school, it's not just philosophy. It's often just hiding what you don't know and trying to, you know, put up a shield and so forth. This isn't exactly authenticity, but it is something about that sincere and earnest. Several reviewers have said, you know, I'm very earnest. But I think to do philosophy, you have to be serious in that way. You can have fun, but there's something unironic at its core that I think is constantly in sort of danger of slipping through the cracks, particularly with all the postmodern French, you know, frou-frou philosophy.
You can be earnestly frou-frou.
Frou-frou.
I think postmodernism has something to say, but I think a number of these schools have something to say. It's just that none of them get it right. Because we're fallible, we have to be honest about that. But I do think that in our Alexandrian age, market-driven, obsessed with celebrity and connectivity through technology, the obsession is visibility, even if only for 15 minutes. And what that means, though, is that people will be visible almost in any way. Now, for the chattering classes to be visible and to be viewed as the smartest person in the room is orgiastic. Because that's fundamentally what they've been taught since they were small. We want you to be the smartest. Yeah. SAT, Harvard, Yale, so-and-so, on to the establishment, become well-adjusted, the injustice. Well, for me, that's spiritually empty. That's existentially vacuous. Because smartness is just a form of idolatry. Yeah. I want to know who's the most courageous to raise certain unsettling questions. Who's the most courageous to sacrifice for something bigger than them? Who's the most courageous to be connected to the best of who came before? But in our Alexandrian age, market-driven, the smartness has become almost a fetish, in the same way our commodities became a fetish in the way, you know, the great Karl Marx talked about it. And that's one of the roles of a lover of wisdom. A dramatic lover of wisdom is to say, look how shallow, empty, plastic this really is. That's the tradition from Jerusalem to Adorno. Now, I'm not saying other traditions don't have a monopoly on it, but if you're concerned about a certain way of being human that's connected to human suffering, that's what you're keeping track of. That's why the critical, that's why critical theory is very important. That's why feminism, Marxism, and so on. This is not PC schools of thought. These are serious ways of engaging the world who love wisdom, who's trying to keep track of forms of idolatry and fetishism and so forth. And that's very unpopular these days, given an empire in decline, grabbing for straws, giving a professional class that is less and less courageous, less and less sacrificial, more narcissistic, more hedonistic, and our young people hungry and wondering what the hell is going on. Are we living at the beginning of the end of the civilization that we were born in?
Well, on that upbeat note, Cornel, the time has come to take questions from the audience, and I'm assuming there are a lot of grabbers for straws present in this room. So, if they will go to the microphones and then direct the question, when you ask the question, direct it to a particular person on the panel.
I'm wondering if the question, does philosophy still matter, seems really historically constructed. Like, what makes it think that it, quote, once did matter, like was relevant, right? And why are we so anxious, like immediately right now, like that it is, relevant or something? We have to answer this question or something. I guess Simon.
Well, I don't know. I didn't pose the question for the symposium,
Well,
but
let me answer this because I'll let you off the hook. My agent came up with this as a title.
All right.
I had all these other titles, and he said, "Man, they're really boring." And he said, "We're in an Alexandrian age, and we have to have a." So I'm not really certain it's the most perspicuous question, to be honest, and I don't think we should saddle Simon with having to answer.
No, but we're stuck. I mean, what Anthony said about on the one hand, you have a sort of a professional academic philosophy. On the other hand, you have a spiritual quest for meaning, which is being fed by varieties of New Age belief. And philosophy, which should occupy some middle ground between those two, is not occupying that terrain. Has it occupied that terrain before? Yes, it has occupied that terrain before, in the interstices of history, here and there, in its high moments. And there are moments in the history of philosophy, very recent moments in the history of philosophy, after the First World War, which unleashed an extraordinary renewal of interest in philosophy in people like Lukács, Heidegger, Rosenzweig, and others, in the Second World War as well. There's a connection between philosophy and war here, which we might want to think about. But, I think it's the issue that, I mean, this is something that we did when this experiment of the stone, is that, we thought we were going to get, we were surprised at how much interest we got. We got 32 people read it. We got more people than that. A few people read the thing. And what was interesting was two things. The number of page views, which was like 6 million or something, that's crazy amount of people read this thing. And the disapproval in the profession that this should be taking place. Right? People horrified that there's a philosophy. I'd think that philosophers might be pleased that there be a philosophy column in the New York Times. They're horrified. Horrified. It's the worst conceivable thing. It's a nightmare.
What kind of arguments do they put forth?
Well, it should be them. That was the argument. It should be them running it. That's the basic argument.
Oh, I see.
I mean, because
that high quality kind of response.
That high quality kind of argument.
Yeah, I see.
So, there is a gap, there is a role that philosophers should be fulfilling, which isn't being fulfilled. Philosophers are not doing their job as they should be. And so I think the question is pertinent anyway.
But just one question about the relation between war and philosophers.
Yeah.
The connection between the catastrophic, the calamitous, and the monstrous.
Yeah.
When it has a major presence in the culture and civilization, people begin to ask fundamental questions. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you get the flourishing of not just philosophers, but people raising philosophical questions. Mm-hmm. Now, for people who live every day in the catastrophic, they got philosophical questions in various forms, maybe not professional philosophy, but in music, dialogue in barbershops. The catastrophic is always already there. That's what it is to be a blues person. You're always dealing with the catastrophic every day, given all this suffering out here.
Jim, your comment that it's the happiness of a philosopher is circumstantial.
Who are you asking the question of?
it's a comment for Jim, and then I'm going to turn it to Astra, because I want Astra's response
Okay.
to what Jim said. That you had said that, you know, the happiness of a philosopher is circumstantial. And it seems, I was like hit by the pessimism of that. And so my question to Astra is, in terms of you've met a lot of philosophers, and aside from anybody in this room, who have you been inspired by however, whatever it was about them that inspired you, whether it was their mind or whether it was their life. But I'm just curious because I'm not willing to go down the route of it's just circumstance.
Yeah. Deeply inspired. And I think one aspect, but is it happiness that inspired me? Not so much. That wasn't what I was going for, but rather inspired sometimes by the patience certain people had to tread over the same questions over and over so that they could speak to people who weren't already initiated. And this was a sort of incredible gift, I thought, to people to say, you know, I'll meet you where you are, and I will talk to you like you're an intelligent human being, and, you know, invite you into this kind of thinking. And, you know, yeah, that's not a recipe for happiness, but I think there's a depth of connection there that I found really, I found it very valuable. So the people that I ended up filming with and that I've communicated with, I think are committed to doing that. To, again, it's not about authenticity, but what they do is they bring their struggle into the public sphere. And I think that's I think that's what we need philosophy to do. It's like, I don't actually know how to live in perfect integration with my mind or my values. What would that really mean? You know, you wouldn't be human, but I'll struggle in public. And I think there's something really worthy about that.
Question over here.
I guess I'll direct this question to Anthony, since you were with The Economist, because I think philosophy matters a great deal right now. But the kind of philosophy that has mattered has been masquerading as something else, and it's been operating in economics departments throughout the country. And it's a very market-driven, ugly, scary kind of philosophy, and the fountainhead is flying off the shelves right now. And how do you, in philosophy departments or in the humanities, mount a challenge to that devil?
Right. Very good question. I think there are actually similar problems in other disciplines. You will also find in science, professional science, very bad philosophical thinking. And I suppose I'm more aware of the problem in science than economics. Now, there is a lot of good popular philosophical writing about economics in all sorts of places that takes on, I think you're alluding to Ayn Rand and other eccentric theories. So I don't think there's any great intellectual problem about how you take on things like that. It's done in the normal way, but it helps if people, say in economics departments, have some respect for philosophers. It helps if scientists have some respect for philosophers. They will then read the good and informed critiques of their work, because some people just won't touch anything that's by a philosopher, and that's very unfortunate, I think.
But again, it just doesn't work to say that's not good philosophy, which is everybody's response to Ayn Rand. And you know, she made it her mission to bring her philosophy to the people, and it was very successful. And she did it through novels, through fiction. Yeah. And it astonishes some of us. My grandmother is an objectivist. That this is taken seriously, but to say it's just not good philosophy doesn't cut it. People have to figure out a way to invite people into other ways of thinking about the world and their relationship to other people and success and all these things.
But I think there's a difference between bad philosophy being part of a cult on the margins as opposed to Alan Greenspan and company carrying the text around, having tremendous power and affecting millions of people all around the world. So there's issues of power here, there's issues of structures and institutions, and the ways in which neoliberal and neoconservative models and economics has become hegemonic, inseparable from greed-driven policies on Wall Street, greed-driven policies of corporate elites with the weakening of unions, the demonizing of unions, public unions, and so forth and so on. So that we have to tell a larger story beyond just good philosophy, bad philosophy, and so forth and so on. And that's still very important. I don't want to downplay the degree to which, if it's unconvincing and so forth, needs to be acknowledged. but the operations of power are always already there. And we didn't need Michel Foucault to tell us that. People who were victimized by it every day already knew it. They just didn't critically reflect in the way in which Foucault and Marx and a host of others do. But if we're going to tell that larger story about Ayn Rand, it's not just the book. It's who reads that book and how they gain access to tremendous amounts of power and resources and status, and then how intellectuals who's supposed to be so critical capitulate to these lies until catastrophe hits, and then they take no responsibility at all. You see what I mean? That's what's down. I mean, that's the worst kind of thing for the younger generation when they look at intellectuals and say, oh, God, you all gangsters like everybody else.
Yeah.
That's not good for intellectual calling. You know what I mean?
But also, I just read an article that banks are giving big multi-million-dollar grants to universities on the contingency is they have to teach courses on Ayn Rand in their philosophy departments. So, but so it's coming to a university near you.
But there's nothing wrong with teaching Ayn Rand. I've been teaching white supremacists for a long time. You critically engage the sister. That's all. You critically engage. She got something to say. She's just not convincing. She got something to say.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's actually great, the point about being convincing. I wanted to ask, well, I'm supposed to direct. Can I pick two?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Cornell and...
You make them short.
Cornell and Simon. No, two people, two respondents.
Yeah,
okay. What is for you the role between, on your conceptions of philosophy, what is the role of argumentation, of being convincing, and how does that relate to rhetoric and writing style? Because one part of the battle between poetry and philosophy, right, it isn't poetry exactly, it's rhetoric. It's other ways of being convincing. And one way that we cut off the philosophical from other discourses is a particular way, usually framed in terms of reason, but maybe not necessarily, right? A mode of argumentation, whether that's done in the super technical logic chopping way of the analytic philosophy that everybody hates, or in the more discursive way of Hume and the Platonic dialogues and Descartes, right? What's the role of that part of philosophy, the argumentative aspect?
I don't think you can draw a clear line between the argumentative and the rhetorical. And I think philosophy as an activity, if we go back to Socrates, begins with the threat of rhetoric, right? The threat of sophistry, the threat that if you pay people money to teach you how to speak, it will persuade, make a legal case, and you'll get your day in court and win your case. Philosophy begins with a rhetoric against rhetoric, right? So this dramatic, extraordinary dramatic situation of the Republic, the competitive discourses are sophistry and tragedy and tragic poetry and Homeric epic as well. So philosophy, you cannot isolate argument from rhetoric and from persuasion. There is a certain idealization of argumentation within certain traditions of philosophy that believes that you can, as it were, operate on the basis of a pure idea of rigor. I think that's also a rhetorical strategy, based on a certain, as it were, idea that philosophy can imitate the sciences, which it can't, and in my view, shouldn't. So I think you can draw a clear line there.
Do you have a word, Cornell, to add to that?
Yeah, I would want to say that certainly the triumph or the promise of the triumph of persuasion over force sits at the center of the philosophical tradition that goes back to Athens. And I think Whitehead's two great works, Science and Modern World as well as Adventures of Ideas, are the two great monuments to affirm this tradition. And he understands that persuasion comes in a number of different forms. There's logical argumentation. There's poetic, compelling language. There's a whole host of ways in which people are persuasive. Going back to Jesus was persuasive not because of the arguments. He spoke in parables. Well, parabolic language is very important. Kafka is persuasive to me. He's a parabolic writer. He's not a logical writer. There's different ways of persuading people, you see. But it's this hope of persuasion over force. That's why the attack on Thrasymachus is so central. Might does not make right. Let's engage in some forms of persuasion. Now, that doesn't mean persuasion is going to be effective, Right? Nozick makes his point in philosophical explanation. You don't push preacher against the wall out of logical coercion, because there's different wiggle spaces and ways in which people can get around it. But in the end, we're about persuasion rather than force, because force is basically about, just, again, gangster activity. It's about crushing. And philosophy begins with Pytho. It begins with, it's in Plato's Timaeus. This is what the cosmology is about, right? It's persuasion pushing back force and the promise of that, which is maybe an empty promise, but it's still a leap of faith that philosophers make.
I just want to add briefly something that you said, Simon, about the rhetorical criticism of rhetoric, is that philosophy is a specific form of persuasion.
Yes, yes.
And that obviously Plato's Apology, the speech that's given to Socrates, is a masterpiece of rhetoric. But it's very clear, specifically in that monologue, it's not a dialogue, that Socrates is not a professional debater. He's not somebody who's just trying to make an argument for something he doesn't truly believe in. What matters is that it's persuasion based on what you sincerely and earnestly believe. And the suspicion of the sophists is like they're a debating club, and they basically prop up arguments they don't, in fact, sincerely take in their own life.
Question over here.
My question is for Dr. Miller. My name is Alex Kelly. I want to start by saying I agree with Dr. West that I've appreciated the work that you've done for us with this book. I was struck by the end of the book, in the last sentence, if I've understood it correctly, you say that for the thinking person, there's no firm goal and no certain reward in life, that we're sort of doomed to this life of contemplative labor and unimpeachable desire for something certain. My question is that, well, you've given us this book where you draw out these 12 exemplary lives. And I'm wondering if you're really saying that we've learned nothing essential about human nature or the world over the course of this work.
At the end, what I was trying to say is that I think it's a mistake. I learned a lot by writing the book, and what I learned, among other things, is what is the deep genealogy of where I got my obsession with introspection and self-examination. And that was something that was intrinsically interesting to me to discover. What I don't think you can take away from these kinds of characters is to look to any one of them and to say, aha, there's the answer. And if I would live my life the way they lived their life, then I wanted to not make that possible. And it's very hard. I mean, Emerson and Nietzsche were, incredible in their rhetoric of sort of stopping you in your tracks when you think that you are going to emulate them by saying, no, be yourself. And I wanted to say that, to me, the idea of an unending quest, no firm goal and no certain reward, I don't think you can promise that you'll have happiness or tranquility. You might have moments of joy. I do believe it's a large measure of luck, what temperament you've been given. When Bernard Williams talks about moral luck, I think he's right, and people were angry with that. Aristotle says something similar about the role of luck in the capacity to lead a happy or a good life. But as I said earlier, I feel as if this is inescapably part of my conception of self that was engraved in me at such a young age. I can't think my way out of it. And therefore, it's a fate. And I find it endlessly interesting, even though it doesn't yield any kind of very, there's no fortune cookie moral of the story I can hand out at the end. And that wasn't the point of the book. The point of the book was to sort of move in cross purposes where if you think what you want is happiness or meaning in life, you probably won't find it here, but my God, what an amazing odyssey and saga. And isn't it amazing that people could have lived such lives? And it thrills me, and it thrilled me to write it, even though on some kind of intellectual level, I couldn't say, here is, the take-home message. In that sense, I just felt I couldn't write an edifying book. I mean, my book was published the same day as All Things Shining by Bert Dreyfuss and Sean Kelly, and they actually, it's the opposite kind of book. It's like we live in a world without meaning. It's nihilistic, but if you want to grasp some sense of collective sacred experience, go to sporting events and. It's
Well,
like
with all due respect, Jim, they're making fortune cookies, right? Yes, go ahead.
But do you want to follow up? I mean, you're still standing.
No, I'm just standing here to pay my respect. Later, I would love to.
I want to pay my respects too, and I think one way in which you've all validated philosophy this evening that hasn't come up is you've evinced that philosophy is this extraordinary dialogue that takes place across time, space, cultural barriers, linguistic barriers. You've alluded to people who wrote in German, in French, in Italian, in Hebrew, in any number of languages. And the question that I have for you is not a philosophical question, it's a factual question. To what extent are English-speaking philosophers within the English-speaking world today actively engaged with philosophers contemporaries, not French, obviously the French thing we can bracket, you've alluded to that. Let's say German, Norwegian, Chinese, Japanese, practicing philosophers that do not write in English. To what extent is English-speaking philosophy continuing to engage with their contemporaries in other linguistic traditions and cultural traditions? That's my question.
It's a question that's changing. I mean, when Cornell talks about an Alexandrian age, one of the features of the Alexandrian age was that Greek became the common language of the Mediterranean. So if we think of Greece as this land, Greece with this culture, which is the center of Europe, the birth of European civilization, you always miss the point. I mean, Greek was this lingua franca, which spread out geographically across the world. English is a bit like that. So the question, I learned languages as a student because you couldn't read the books, because they weren't translated. So you had to read French and German just to find out what these interesting things were. That's changed. In a generation, that's changed. So there are real questions about, the question about comparative philosophy is a huge question. There's comparative literature. We know what that is. What is comparative philosophy? At the level of historiography, philosophers are very naive. We assume there's this thing that begins in Athens and ends Nietzsche or Heidegger or whatever. And it goes sort of Athens to Germany to somewhere up here, somewhere like that. We need a much more complicated historiographical picture. Augustine was African, right? Another question I had for Jim's book is something which, they're all blokes, right? 12 blokes in the book, and there's a reason that.
I thought you would like this laddish philosophy.
Well, no, but there's something. Again, it's a question of, for example, in 1690, there was a book written in Latin in Paris called Historia Mulierum Philosopharum, a history of women philosophers, which identified 65 women philosophers in antiquity and the Middle Ages, some of whom there's evidence for, Hypatia, Hipparchia, some of whom there's no evidence for at all. But the point of the anecdote is that we need another historiography of the discipline. So philosophers are very bad at that. We accept a certain standard picture of history. This is the way things worked out. It's called the West, and that is to miss the point, right? And so that wasn't. I don't know whose question I'm answering. Something I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Question?
Okay. Yeah, this is a question, I guess, addressed to Jim, but others as well who have sort of picked up on this theme, which has been asked in some ways, but it has to do with the question of should there be any relationship between a person's philosophy and the way in which they live their lives. Reading through Jim's book, Jim, as you've said, in Socrates' case, it looks like he, in some ways, embodied his philosophies, but Socrates was a mythical character. Montaigne seemed to be relatively happy, but, those were his his genes. But the whole issue of should we look for any sense of there being some consistency between a person's philosophy and the way in which they live their lives? Does it matter if Heidegger was a Nazi? Is it important to find evidence or some link between his philosophy and the fact that he was a Nazi, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that it all depends on the philosopher. Willard von Orman Quine actually wrote an autobiography, which I didn't think was particularly interesting. It's not relevant to his major epistemological
He
essay.
called it the time of my life. What a time it was. I mean, God bless the brother.
But if somebody presents themselves as a cynosure of virtue, as Rousseau did in the 18th century, well then, I'm sorry, it's fair game to find out. I mean, Voltaire did it in a kind of horrible and nasty and cruel way, but how you live your life, the hypocrisy becomes relevant. So some of the people in my book really did try and struggle to be integrated personalities and to present to others, to readers and those who followed them, an example to be emulated and followed. And for a philosopher like that, this would be true of Seneca, it'd be true of Augustine. You betcha it matters how they live their life. And that is the older original tradition of philosophy as a way of life, which goes into eclipse starting with the rise of modern scientific philosophy, which is really what I try to do is take the ordinary conventional history of philosophy and flip it around so that it's looking at the losing side of that particular saga. So in one level, what Simon said is true. I'm working in the most absolutely, dead white European male tradition, and you could tell a different story with a different volume, looking at different philosophers. But for some philosophers, it matters enormously.
But I think the danger here is, though, just quickly, the danger is here, you can't infer that because somebody's a political thug, the way Heidegger was, that he's not a philosophic genius, too.
Yeah.
And in fact, his work enables an engagement with Hölderlin, for example, who was not a political thug at all. He's the opposite of a political thug. And his wrestling with Hölderlin makes a difference. So that the complexity needs to be acknowledged here, because human beings are complicated folk. There's no excuses at all. Ezra Pound was a political thug. That doesn't mean his poetry ought not to be read.
Right.
And we can go on and on and on, but that easily slides, especially in our Alexandrian age. You just point out somebody's a thug, you don't have to read them at all. Now, if that were the case, wouldn't be too many books in the library.
We only have time for just two more questions, so one there.
I just wanted to take the question slightly differently. Does philosophy still matter? Sitting down and looking at the transcript of this whole conversation so far today, 100 years from now, if there is 100 years from now, we will be struck by precisely the lack of urgency of the moment. Specifically, global warming, the sense of coming to the end of time, which either, whether or not you think it's inevitable it's going to happen, there's certainly a chance that something terrible is on the verge of happening, and does philosophy have something to say about that? Does it still matter? Is there a thing, even in academic philosophy, I don't mean Anglo-American, but I mean in philosophy classes at the New School and so forth, do students walk in the room and say, this thing is coming to an end, this thing feels like it's coming to an end? What of the tradition of Socrates coming forward still matters? And I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm just, what does? And is there a sense in the classroom, in ethics classrooms, in epistemology classrooms and so forth, that that is what desperately needs to be being talked about right now?
I want to say something that, repeat something I said earlier, which really has struck me, is the extent to which I feel like we live in a time that is analogous to the time Augustine lived in. And that was a time in which things were ending. A world was crumbling. The empire was going. And I think partially why it turns out to be a surprising popular hunger for something that looks, smells, and feels like rather old-fashioned forms of philosophy is this sense of if it is truly in time, end times, an apocalyptic moment, there is an appeal of certain kinds of forms of philosophy that can rival the appeal of certain forms of religion. And I don't think, the answer I'm giving you has nothing to do with what gets taught at the philosophy department of the New School, and I think it really has nothing to do with the mainstream of academic scientific philosophy. But I think the hunger that's out there, what's happened is it's sort of overflown the barriers that Astra was talking about, where you have this kind of sense among professional philosophers, only us get to do this. You guys don't know what you're talking about. The hunger is so great. You know, I don't know if that's really, you know, a response, because, of course, I don't know, do philosophers have anything to say about global warming, really?
Yeah, sure. Since they're usually accused of producing so much hot air, you wouldn't go to, you shouldn't really go to them for a solution to global warming.
Last question.
Can I just speak to that?
Yeah, all right.
I mean, the urgency, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's an absolute sense of urgency, you know, and I'm watching very closely and very, very carefully what's happening, for example, in Tunisia and Egypt at the moment. Anyway, the urgency, yes, but, this is where I agree with our friend Zizek. There's also a need to slow down. There's a fake urgency. There is an ideology of urgency which defines the present. Right? Things are spinning out, and the idea of the end times. We have a secularized Christian eschatology, right? Which we then sacrifice ourselves to a certain way. There's also a need to slow down and to reflect and think, and that's what philosophy does. And philosophy, in its slowness and in its refusal to embrace the fake urgency of the present, and to turn backwards. This is where, say, you know, Benjamin is so important. The angel of history faces backwards. You know, I think at this point, one of the most important things that philosophy can do is to try and divest us of this plague of the future that we live under. This pressure of the future. What Jim's up to in this book, and you know, others amongst us are up to, is trying to slow things down, to cultivate a historical sensibility. This is an arsenal. These are armaments which can be used for critique in the most. So there's also a need to slow down.
Absolutely, and just quickly, Brother Lewis, just quick, because I mean,
we're running out of time.
In Brother Simon's work, I detect a sense of urgency from the very beginning. Early stuff on decay. But most importantly, we shouldn't confuse or conflate decline with fall or decay with collapse. The empire has been declining for a while. It won't fall for a long time. The American Gibbon is not writing the text right now. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that we do need truth tellers. We do need analysis of what is going on, and the sense of a state of emergency echoes of the ninth thesis of Benjamin's thesis on history. But we need critical space, because the market-driven conception of time is so intense in stimulation and titillation, you can't get space and distance for critical reflection. That's democratic time. And democratic time is being completely evacuated with market time. Don't have time for grassroots organizing. Don't have time for critical reflection. Don't have time for bonds of trust. Don't have time to sustain your organization. Well, that's one of the ways in which the capitalist civilization reproduces itself. And so that needs critical reflection. I love Zizek's latest book. And he writes big books, but that's a big book, and takes time out of your life to read that darn thing. But it's worth taking, because he's critically reflecting on this, even though, again, he's not right about it, but he's got some things to say.
See, my instinct is that philosophy is not the right tool for global warming, that the left makes a mistake that we're arguing, that it's the quality of our arguments, that if we just get the facts straight, we will win people over. This is about feeling the facts. You know, I think that we actually need, I don't think philosophy is the best tool here. The information is out there. The challenge is making it feel urgent. I'm not sure that that's something you do through rational argument, even if it's... But
you would argue that Zizek's latest book has great value, though, right?
Sure, but it might
Jim,
not
we're
be,
gonna
it might not have great utility
All right.
in this struggle.
Last question.
I don't know.
Oh, okay, thank you for all of you guys for being here and speaking to us. When you ask what is philosophy, what comes to mind, and this draws partly on your answers, is that it seems as though it's one of the only fields that requires you as a baseline to look beyond yourself, to evaluate life from outside of your own perspective. I see one of the main issues in life is that we're trapped. I only see things the way I see them, but life is judged kind of from 30,000 feet. There's billions of people on Earth. So if you look at philosophy in that way, I think asking the question, does philosophy still matter, is this silly question in that, of course it matters. Of course it matters. It's all about the context. Meaning, we need to, it seems as though for philosophy to matter, we need to show people why different perspectives, looking beyond your own self, will matter. And then in that respect, you can apply it to anything in life. You could apply it to art. You could apply it to economics.
You get the last word.
I just wanted to know what you guys would think about that type of general formulation.
We're going to give Jim Miller the last word on that one because that touches on the first question he posed.
Well, but I'll give you the last word. I mean, you've given an actually pretty good answer and a heartfelt answer. And I just sense in the room, when you get this number of people gravitating to what could be a rather arid topic, that something's afoot. And that I suspect that what you've just said, you speak for a lot of other people. And, but we can find out now. We'll see if we persuaded anybody. Because Anthony, he wanted me to start. We started with show of hands, and now we want to have another show of hands. And we all realized out there that we could have made people think philosophy didn't matter after an hour and a half of talking. I'll pose the question again, though. So if the question is, does philosophy still matter, how many people now say no?
We lost.
You have the majority, and on that happy note, thank you all very much.
We should announce that the book signing is up there.